Everyone. So we're back again with episode 3 of the Corona Time podcast. I'm Alexis, for those of you who haven't been tuning in or this is your first time. And I'm here with my co-host, Chris. And we just want to sort of preface, before we sort of get into the meat of our discussion, that we will be having, this is sort of a spoiler warning, we will be talking about key points and plot or events in the movie, so there will be some spoilers, just for a heads up. If you haven't seen the movie, please go check it out first. And this week we will be reviewing Upstream Color. And so this is the second movie that David Carruth has, I believe, written and directed and produced. The first movie that he came out with, and that was actually in our first episode, was Primer. And in this film, he had a significantly higher budget. I believe this time around he had around $100,000, which is quite a bit more than he had in his first go around with Primer. But yeah, so you want to get into it, Chris? What were your thoughts on the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I think so obviously if you've been following our podcast, you know that we covered Primer, and I could actually see even in the first 15 minutes, not just an improvement in terms of budget, but also that he had refined his style. He had taken a lot of the personal gripes he felt and he expressed in his, when he talked about Primer, and he improved upon those to make, I think, a technically even better movie. But I think what I like Upstream Color a lot, and actually probably a lot more than Primer, is that he explores some very interesting topics, and he doesn't just like Primer, he doesn't try to over explain them. We can, agree or disagree on our interpretations. I feel like his movies are kind of like that. They're kind of like paintings where you're left with more questions than answers in the end, So I genuinely enjoy this movie. And I like I said, previously, I enjoyed it actually more than Primer, which I wasn't actually expecting going in. So
that's fair. It was definitely a little bit of, it was a different subject matter than Primer, but it was still really interesting because he still wanted to go with you can tell he likes a science fiction route quite a bit, as certain themes within his 2 films so far. I don't know if he's actually produced anything else, but I hope he makes more movies in the future so that we can potentially review them. But yeah, I actually really enjoyed this film as well. I thought it was very interesting sort of direction he was going. There were a lot of scenes that it was simply just without any audio, any dialogue going on. So it was just left to the viewer to sort of just visualize and try to sort of interpret and internalize what was going on within the sequence of events in the film. I believe it was around half an hour into the film, you actually start to learn the 2 main characters' names, those being Chris and Jeff.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting because I was like, wow, I'm like a third of the way through the movie and they still haven't dropped who the characters' names are. So that was pretty interesting in terms of the directorial direction that Carruth went in. And it was kind of the same way I felt in his first film, Primer, where it was there were more characters in that film, but their names didn't get brought up a whole lot. And so that I found very confusing at times.
Well, I will say I'm starting to become convinced that Carruth doesn't really care much about character names. No, I think he cares about the characters, but like I said, I think his style is not to over explain or have extra exposition. It seems like he's against exposition, actually. And like you said, I watched the whole movie, so I remember their names, like Chris and Jeff. But I feel like just like Primer, he doesn't really like I said, he doesn't have them sometimes a director or writer will have the character just say their name so it clicks in your mind, or have another character say the name, but he doesn't really do that. So it's like you could be watching the movie and be like, wait, now we learn that this person's name is X or Y. What I found interesting about the beginning is that it actually took me. Because nothing's explained, right? So it took me a while, or I knew that the guy that, that one of the I'm going to call him the thief. I think that's what he cited in the credits.
He is.
Puts, does the worm thing. I was confused, just like in Primer in the beginning, wait, what is this, plants and worms? And then he kidnaps the lady. And I'm like, is this does he have a bigger role to play? And then I realized that he doesn't really. He has a role, but nothing
he does. Yeah.
He does have a role, but it's I'll get into it later with what I think the theme is. But I thought I was expecting, I think because of my bias, because of Primer, I was expecting to see Carruth's character a lot earlier, and I didn't. So I'll give him kind of credit where he kind of subverted my expectations because I know he's the director. I know he's going to be one of the lead characters. And I see this other guy like basically in the whole first part of the movie, you know. I really felt for Chris when like it became apparent that like he was just having her like basically give him all her wealth.
Yeah.
And I was just like, you know, I felt bad. And then even like all the weird stuff he would have her do, right, with the water and then the writing, and I'm like, man, like, it took me a while to realize that he was just manipulating her. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what he was doing. It was sort of his whole strategy, and you could tell that even up to that point, you don't sort of know his whole backstory, but you could tell based on the way he's talking to her and making her do things that this isn't the first rodeo. Like he's definitely done this to other people before. I kind of gathered that pretty quickly into it, especially once he started saying, "All right, like your mom's been kidnapped," and you could tell she was in a sort of submissive state under the influence of the parasite. That once he started saying, you know, is there anything that you could do to sort of help pay off and rescue your mom? Because he fabricated that story just to like make her feel vulnerable. Then he's like, yeah, I have like some equity in my house. We could take out like a mortgage, etc., and go or take out an equity line. And you could tell he was just manipulating her at that point, and he was just going around and doing this to a bunch of random people. I mean, clearly, because he's just much like how he manipulates and his the people that he targets. Much like what he does to like his victims in terms of inducing them with parasites. He's a parasite as well, just like leeching all of their funds. So it was interesting. There wasn't a whole lot of direction or audio. You kind of had to figure that out. But it was interesting that sort of approach that he took to sort of portray that sequence of her being manipulated.
Yeah. Yeah, and then even like the first. Oh, go ahead.
So, what do you think of the sampler? That being the second guy who was a pig farmer.
I was gonna say, yeah. I mean, before we get into that, I was actually gonna reference like even like the first interactions between Chris and Jeff. Like, obviously it's sort of explained later, but like at first I was like, okay, he's asking me to kind of like something's going on here because like they're sort of drawn to each other and you don't figure out why until a bit later. But even that kind of sequence, I was like, oh, this is definitely a Carruth film where there's probably a meaning, but like it's not going to be told to you right away of why they're kind of trying. Yeah, but with the sampler, it's very interesting you bring that up because again, his character is just it's kind of suddenly introduced. You know, she shows up there, and you know he takes the worm out, and you know basically nurses her back to health. But it seems like he's kind of like, to me, my interpretation is that he is kind of like like you know how like some people feel like you know God is like around, but maybe he never acts or does anything. It felt like he was that kind of character where like he was just somebody. He was like an observer. You know, like he was a man of a curiosity. You know, he looks like he was very obsessed about his music because he kept writing the musical notes. Again, this is a typical Carruth film where, you know, why he has this ability and like why he can, you know, do this even in the first place is not explained. And I actually don't think it's relevant to what he's trying to tell us. But I found his character to be mysterious. And then when we get to the ending, I have some thoughts on his character overall. But I found it to be very mysterious and also intriguing. But like, I didn't think he was like, you know, good or evil. I just felt like he was just, you know, he was just doing like he was just doing what he wanted to do, right? He wanted to do music. He wanted to help this lady out. He was curious about their lives. You can argue that maybe, you know, he invaded their privacy by, you know, basically taking away their memories. But I bet you he thought that he was helping them because the memories were so traumatic and they wouldn't be able to move on with their lives with all the bad things they had to do, you know?
So, I mean, I can see where you're going with that, but I sort of disagree in that when he was helping them and, you know, with the procedures, because that's how they got to know him, he would draw in people who were sort of infected with this parasite with some of the ultrasonic sounds. They would go to him and be like, once it's at the end of that first life cycle. So I should preface this. In the film, you're infected with a parasite. This parasite sort of has 3 different life cycles. First one, it infects the the human host. So it's in the human host for a while, and then the person essentially via transfusion, the parasite goes from the human host to the pig. In terms of that, and so that's the second stage of the life cycle once the parasite is in the pig, and then once the parasite or the pig dies and the parasite is can then move into water, and then it goes and turns the orchid blue. That's essentially sort of like the three life cycle stage for this parasite. So during the sort of second stage, that the sampler is sort of responsible for the transition of the parasite going from the first stage of its life cycle to the second, going into the pig. And you could say that he is sort of doing a service to the humans, but I would say it's his role is more complicated because he needs the humans and he sort of takes advantage of them via curing them, because his, as far as I could tell, or my big takeaway is that everyone sort of benefited from this parasite in one way or another from its life cycle stages. And in the second one, he definitely benefited in terms of he would go and sort of visit the experiences as sort of like a god-like figure of these victims. And he would use their experiences that they would be dealing with, whether it be, I believe one of the victims that you don't really know, he's a minor character. His wife sort of has a heart attack, and he had been mean to his wife in like a sequence of events day to day, and you can tell he was regretting that. So this sampler figure was observing these experiences that all these people were having, and he used that to draw inspiration for his music, which he would then sell. So I don't know if he was super, I would say, selfless, because he was definitely benefiting and manipulating people to use their experiences for his own good.
Yeah, I guess to clarify my point, I don't think he was like, Jesus-like in his like empathy, but I don't think he was also like morally trying to do harm. I think you can argue that the thief is definitely like, using the power to his advantage and then, stealing directly. Like that's where like the moral gray area is. Cause I would argue that like he might be using them to his advantage, but by the time they come to him, they're already in that state. You know what I mean? And
right. But, or I'll let you finish. Go ahead. And then I'll share my point.
I'll let you go ahead.
So what I would say, and I didn't touch upon this, but this guy, because he could visit the people who were previously infected, and they had a direct link to the pigs, he knew that anything that happened to the pigs would have a direct link on them. And so when there's a clear point once he takes the baby piglets from the litter and throws them overboard, he knew that it was going to have a direct effect on them, like his action in doing so, or doing that, and killing the pigs and throwing them over the bridge into the river. And so, like, you can't say that necessarily he was just sort of like that he didn't have a direct effect on these people, or that he didn't have a negative effect on these people.
Yeah, the whole pig throwing and basically like killing. It seemed like my sense is that Carruth, he needed that mechanic in there because he really wanted to touch upon like cycles and how do you break cycles. I feel like that's basically the
of course
theme A of the movie. Other than like identity and all this other stuff, like does your identity change if your memory is like manipulated or lost? So I think that's like theme B in my opinion, but theme A is definitely the cycle stuff. And again, the ending is I think it has a sort of a message around truth and how do you break a cycle. But I mean, the reason maybe I'm kind of I don't want to say defending, but kind of like putting the argument that I'm putting up is because we'll jump to the end a little bit then. Because when he's killed, not only did I feel like it was very abrupt, but I thought it was very like, all of the characters in this story, like they have all their faults and nobody's perfect. And I found it very like, I would like to actually sit down and ask like, Carruth about like, why was this character killed so violently? Like, it seemed like of all the characters, he wasn't like the devil in this movie. Like, basically you kill somebody who is maybe just like any other human, has good and bad, and now he's like the answer why, like inadvertently, because I don't think these people knew that, like, obviously the worms were going to the river. When I say they, I mean Chris and Jeff were going to the river, and it was, the orchards would then, turn blue, and then they would sell it, and then the kid would bring it to the thief, and then the thief would again use the worms to infect more people, and use his magic powers, as they say, to manipulate the next victims, basically. Because I wonder what he's trying to say about cycles, that maybe to end cycles, we always talk about we need to fight the corruption, fight the injustice. But I wonder if his message is more subtle, saying like maybe it's not the direct evil you have to fight, but maybe the indirect evil you have to fight. So I think it's a more fascinating conversation to have, because it's very like, it leaves you with more questions than answers. And I think this movie does that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like anything in Carruth's filmmaking that I've seen so far. It kind of like leaves it open-ended in certain areas, so you don't know exactly what he wanted you to take away in every part of his film in terms of his messaging. But yeah, I mean, sure, the thief is obviously like the biggest villain, because he kidnaps and stuns and infects these people intentionally with the idea of sheer motive is just to rob them, without a doubt. And then he leaves them, or not only robbed, like penniless, but then they also have this, he leaves them infected with a parasite. And that part really, I guess, bugged me, just seeing like the skin move quite a bit at the end. It was an interesting visual, and it's cool how he was able to do that. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of like, I'm seeing your skin literally crawl. But yeah, so you knew like he was just like purely evil. I think because everyone was benefiting, or like there was a clear benefit for like a specific individual or group of people at every part of the life cycle, I would say that probably the one who had the least, I guess, evil or guilt was probably the orchid sellers, because they're the ones who, other than promote the growth of the parasites, they didn't really do much because they didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah. They were definitely like in the blind about anything. They were just selling plants. Yeah. Actually, because of his ending, which is why I think you're left with, like I said, I'm going to keep saying you're left with more questions than answers. I almost felt that maybe one of the messages was, yeah, there's evil in the world, but you only can really stop it if you stop the source. And maybe the source is something that you actually don't find that, repulsive. And you have to maybe, get rid of that. So I can't find an easy, off the top of my head, like analogy to like real life about like what that would kind of look like. But I guess it would kind of, it kind of puts the thought in your brain that like, we see crime, but maybe the root cause is, money or something, like it's something else. Yeah, we have to like disrupt and destroy first. But maybe poverty or whatever, money or, power structures don't bother us on the day to day because we're kind of benefiting, Yeah, I think this is why I like this one a lot more, because I think Carruth is he explores human themes even in Primer, but in this one, I feel like he's going further and exploring like, some deeper issues, which I was like, very intrigued by. The pig thing was interesting with the worms, and then like how the pigs fall in love, and so they fall in love, and like how they're connected that way.
I think it was a big part of it was like losing yourself and sort of, one of the big things, because they had this connection with the pig, and a lot of the movie was like at the end how it gets resolved is they find their pigs. Really, it seemed like one of it was kind of like a journey of finding yourself, an almost literal way of finding the pig that is a part of yourself too. So it was interesting the way Carruth kind of tied a lot of these kind of themes together. What did you think about the use of Walden throughout the movie?
It's interesting because he basically, I saw an interview, the preface, like after the movie, that confirmed what I thought. So when I first saw it, I thought it was important, but then as we keep watching the movie, I'm like, is it important, or is it just like just there to just be there? And he actually says that like it was just like it's not that important to the structure of the film he was trying to portray, even though he knows a lot of viewers have derived meaning from it. And I was, like I said, I thought there was meaning too, but then, like I said, like at one point, other than the beginning and then the end where they're sending the Walden books out, there was like I didn't see a direct connection. Like I think I get, the civil disobedience thing. You can maybe look it through in a more contemporary lens of like, oh, is he talking about we need to disobey power structures, corruption, and stuff like that? But then I'm thinking like, Kruth always like tries to make movies that kind of would they can be told today or in 15 years, right? Like we said this about the Primer, it's going to age well. So if society changes its lens, are we going to have the same opinion about civil disobedience today as we will in 30 years? So I didn't feel like it was. I think it was used, but I don't think it was like the centerpiece of like he was. You know how some movies are trying to take a book and it's there for very specific reasons, like in The Matrix with the Salamanca. Yeah. But it's so I had the suspicion that it was. I don't want to say prop, but yeah, prop, and he did kind of confirm that in an interview. So, but I think as a viewer at the time, I was just like, oh, there's got to be. It's funny. Maybe he's also tricking me. Maybe he's saying publicly it's a prop, but really he wants to make sure that viewers are deriving some meaning. So I'm curious about your thoughts, but I felt it was like important, but then for some reason when I was watching it, I didn't feel like it was like super important.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to sort of find any sort of parallel connection to it, and part of it was, or the big thing in the movie, like we've touched upon, was sort of breaking cycles, and specifically things that sort of manipulate you or keep you in check. And in a way, they did break that cycle by, how do I explain this? Yeah, it's because of the whole book that they were sort of using throughout was about civil disobedience. In a way, they did. They broke out of that sort of structure or cycle from it. And I don't know if it was like a direct link, but I could see some sort of parallels with the book in terms of how they broke some of their cycles. And they went out of it and, found the farm. I don't know. I was trying to figure out if it was really a direct parallel or maybe he was just using it because it did draw some minor comparisons to some of the stories.
I think it's definitely the minor comparisons because when I saw the Kruth interview that I'm speaking of, I didn't personally buy that it was like kind of like he didn't put as much thought as obviously the audience did, but I think he put some thought because I was thinking like, okay, if you put Twilight there, then it's gonna throw everybody off. So I was like, you picked a book that, like you said, that there's at least some. Maybe not direct analogy. There is some connection a little bit. So I think fans can get it overblown thinking like it's the hidden message of the movie. But I think there is some kind of like he can't just put any book there. He can't just put Twilight. He can't just put like a random like novel there. Like it has to be something that it's still, like I said, I think you're on point. It has to be somewhat related, connecting to the theme and the movie itself, Because I was like, if you put Twilight there, it would have thrown the movie 100% off. Like, don't give me this like, oh well, I needed a book and like, I had read this a long time ago and I liked it, and I was like, okay, I think there's more to it.
I mean, totally. If you look at, here's sort of a real life comparison when you're like talking about sort of racial segregation sort of cycles and structures that were part of like the history of the South through like Jim Crow laws. A lot of that was broken through civil disobedience, and so that's how some of these cycles and structures were sort of dismantled and broken. In a way, like you use civil disobedience as a tool to accomplish that, and in this film they were breaking a cycle too. So I think he was trying to point towards that's one of like the sort of the tools that people can use to break these cycles.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that. There might be even deeper meaning. It's been quite a while since I've actually read the book Walden by Thoreau. So I can't remember exactly what the storylines are, all of his writings, and if there's even more meaning within there from it.
Yeah, I think Kruth is not lying to me in the sense that like I don't think like the book and movie directly relate. Like it's not like super synonymous, but I also don't think it's meaningless. Like like I said, he can't put any book there. That's what I'm getting at.
No, I agree with you. That's some relevance, like we were saying before.
Yeah. So, but I think I think what Kruth is trying to say is that like not every film director is trying to like every little thing has like the sub meaning and like the meta text, as like some academics would say. So I think he's just trying to say that like don't go crazy with it, but like it's still there and it's still a mechanic of the film and the story. Because I could tell that he's kind of against like all the people who watch movies and then they want all these pop references and all these like subtexts and subcultures and stuff. And yeah, and so I think he's definitely wants to push back a bit on that. So I think that's why he has a bit of a stronger stance. But I don't think it's completely meaningless. But I don't think it's like just having the book there isn't like just reading the book won't explain to you this movie. You know, I don't think that's like the case here. So I was gonna ask like what did you in terms of the structure of the movie, like, you know, comparing it to Primer a little bit, I guess, how did you like the flow of this one versus Primer? You know, like,
So I will say this one flow. It was very. I mean, you're caught in the sequence of one of the main character, Chris, being kidnapped, right? So you're sort of thrown in the loop, and you're trying to kind of figure out what's going on. That's like what you get like from the beginning, right? You're kind of like trying to figure out, all right, like. She's kidnapped, she was kind of drugged, what's sort of the motive and intention, and you're not drawn into like another main character until about a third of the way into the movie. So it was really interesting, like trying to piece all that together. And that's sort of I would say, comparison to Primer is you're trying to piece a bunch of things that are happening together to try to get the whole plot. But I would say a big difference is that while the beginning of this was more confusing, Primer was not. The complexity didn't start arriving in Primer until I would say about midway through the film. And so I would say sort of the style and direction in terms of having some clarity. This one was less clear at the beginning, whereas Primer started off with a little bit more clarity and then got more confusing. Whereas this sort of had the opposite.
And then the only thing I will say about the kind of like the structure of the movie is that like there are certain sequences in Upstream Color where he does like quick editing, where like he has like multiple, you know, he's chopped multiple scenes together quickly, and I was just like, I was watching it going like, oh, that's definitely his style. Like he did that in Primer too. So.
Oh yeah, he did that quite a bit. I think it's sort of like you know what you like and what works for you in terms of your filmmaking ability, and that sort of technique just works for him in his films.
Yeah, and I know he's supposedly working on, like, he has a script for a third movie. I'm very intrigued to hopefully see it one day. But his movies are they're in many ways thought provoking. Like they're I could see how he has a cult following in a sense. So it's good stuff.
I have a feeling that if you make whenever the third movie comes out, it's going to be another science fiction sort of thought-provoking film. If it's not, I will be pretty shocked and kind of amazed if he goes in a different direction.
It's I don't know if he's I mean maybe he's a huge sci-fi fan, but I think what he likes about sci-fi is what I think a lot of authors like about sci-fi, like book authors or in fantasy, is that you're able to tweak the world to maybe help you, like a mechanic to help you tell the story you want. Because it's sometimes if you just confine yourself to like the real world, it's hard to pose the questions or ask the themes that you want to pose.
Well, that sort of style works for certain, I would say, authors and directors more than just sort of like nonfiction or fiction style writings. Another sort of director that I would point to is, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but the director who made Ex Machina and Annihilation. That sort of style of having science fiction really helped pave the way for some of the bigger themes and plots that he wanted to portray in his films.
Yeah.
So, gosh, do you remember his name? I can't remember.
I think it's hard to remember because I think he's French Canadian, and so I think it's like a French last name. Well, I
know he wrote the book The Beach as well. Yeah, sorry, that was just a little side note. I just for some reason he came right to the forefront of my mind.
He's purely English. I was completely wrong. Scratch the whole French Canadian thing. It's Alex Garland. Actually,
that's right. Yeah.
that's not even a hard name to remember. I can't believe we blanked on that. Yeah.
It happens, but yeah, no, I really am a fan of like Garland style, and you can tell that science fiction just works for the stories that he wants to tell.
Yeah.
So, but yeah,
so I know I already kind of hinted that like I like Upstream Color more than Primer. I'm curious about like what's your preference between the two?
I really like the Upstream Color, but I think I might have to lean more towards Primer, partly because of I would say Primer was a more ambitious project and storyline to try to tackle, especially knowing that he was like had a ridiculously small budget, barely had enough footage to include in the film, and sort of the direction and I really like the sort of the complexity and unique take on time travel. That just hits more home to me for some reason. So I think I would probably prefer. I like this film a lot, but I preferred Primer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was
Plus,
tough.
I like.
Go ahead.
I like kind of the sort of the indie look and sort of the creative direction that he had to go to sort of accomplish his scenes because it was so low budget. But it was a really good film, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, both are really good films. It was kind of tough for me, but yeah, I don't know why. Like, I know when I was watching Primer, there were parts where I was just kind of like, okay, like I'm gonna like let it go. But this one, I was like, I remember watching it. I was like, oh, I have to like, you know, I couldn't like put it down, and then I had to rewind. Excuse me, the parts that like I was confused about. So, but yeah, you know, it was a tough decision, but like and this is actually one that it's funny. Unlike Primer, I would actually recommend this like more often to a wider audience because even though I think it's I think it's, you know, it's still kind of confusing. I think people can at least get the high level themes by watching this, while Primer, you know, some of the time traveling stuff and some of the, like you said, the roughness of his initial style, I can see turning people off immediately and be like, I can't watch this, you know?
I think that I would say Primer was a more complex plot to convey across a film, sort of the confines of a film anyway, in terms of sort of time. Because, yeah, there's so many different, in Primer, there's so many different parallel sequences, and you have to pay attention really close. Otherwise, you might miss a key event that happened in sort of the sequence of these timelines. Within Upstream Color, it's complex. There are definitely like tough themes, and this is a film where you have to pay attention. Otherwise, you're going to lose some key piece along the storyline. But it's not to the level of complexity that Primer has, simply because of the idea of time travel within the main plot.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I thought both films were interesting, and even though I would recommend this more to people, I think that it still requires like a certain audience. I don't think this movie's for everybody either. You still have to pay attention quite a bit in this film.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will say is that I think this is a movie that people who like movies would watch this one though. Like I think even people who are let's say they're indie film fans and then like they watch Primer, they're probably some people I can see them going like, okay, what did I watch? You know, like while this one at least I think, like I said, the high level like kind of the flow of the story is, you know, it's digestible for like I said, even for people who consider themselves indie enthusiasts, you know. But yeah, it's I mean I liked both films, and you know, I have to admit it now that now I'm also part of the Carruth cult. So so it's he's genuinely, I don't think he's like the best director ever, but I genuinely think he's one of the more intriguing, interesting directors out there. So
yeah, I mean, just based on his style and the types of stories that he obviously likes to tell with his first two films, he's definitely different than most directors, and yeah, become quite a fan after seeing these two projects from him. So I'm really curious and kind of excited. I got to read more about his potential third project that you said that he might be coming out with.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot. People are gonna fact check me on this, but I think it's Tom Holland, the actor, or some actor had gone to the press saying like he's read the initial script and he said it's one of the best scripts he's ever read. So,
Really,
yeah,
I'm curious as to there was definitely growth as a director in editing. Pretty much in every facet in this film, from primer to this film. So I'm curious as to if he's going to even make like another leap for this third film that he's going to come up with.
yeah. Like I said, I can't remember what actor, but he whatever the movie is, some few people have gone to read the script. Again, I don't know how this actor knows Carruth because he's kind of reclusive, but like the hype is there. But I don't like he does only few interviews, but what I will say is that I just wonder in his mind, like he knows that there's going to be a lot of expectations for this third movie. So he's probably like even more obsessed than usual or than ever to make sure it meets the expectations, his own, but also like, it's not like the primer anymore where like he's unknown, right? Like people know of him and they want to see this movie. So I think it's going to be a while before we see it, but I think when we do see it, it will be worth the wait. So
I hope so. I mean, there's definitely directors like that where it takes them a long time to come out with, but once they do decide to release a project, then it's definitely well anticipated and well worth the wait. So we'll see. I can only hope that it's going to live up to his first two films at least.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
We're going to get ratings?
So,
oh, go ahead.
Well, I'm kind of curious. Was there any other comments that you wanted to make? Because I know we sort of had a difference of opinion with the sampler. Is there any? So what parallels did you want to make to him? You called him sort of godlike. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, the sampler, like you said, is actually probably the most interesting character in this movie. Even though he gets shot in the end, but yeah, it seemed like he was like a demigod, right? Like he's able to, cure the individual, and then, like you said, track their lives, and then and then he's been writing, music, and we don't get to hear the music, but you suspect that like he's put so much thought into it that it's probably not bad. And then
well, you hear some of it because he's influenced a lot by sounds.
That's true.
Throughout, like rocks that are just falling in terms of the drainage pipe. Like he loved the thing that you'll kind of chuckle. I don't know how many people in our audience will have seen this, but it made me laugh when he goes up to the electricity pole and he hears some of the electrical noise coming from it. It really reminded me of Serial Experiments Lane, because they use that in a lot of the episodes at the beginning.
Yeah. And for our audience, that was an anime reference. And if you're an anime fan, don't worry, there will be films we'll cover eventually. But we have a list, so
we'll get to it eventually. Anyway, that kind of reminded me about it. But back to the point, you do sort of see some of the influence of his music, because he goes around and plays with different sounds in nature.
I meant more like we don't like hear like the final piece, like he's still, it seems like it's a continuous work in progress, which kind of speaks to the human endeavor of, how we're always striving for perfection. But no, we did have a difference of opinion of the sampler, because I guess, we view the sampler a bit differently. I guess, I don't think he was innocent, but I didn't think he was like, I didn't think he just deserved the fate he got. Death is very sudden and it's final, and that was just my interpretation. But I think that's why this movie is great, because usually great art, you have questions and you also have your own interpretations and feelings after leaving it.
No, it's true. His character was, I would say, by far the most intriguing out of any of the storylines, because you don't even know how sort of his. That's the one thing it was sort of interesting, is you don't know sort of like the background of like these characters that influence so many lives either.
Yeah, you don't know. Like the only thing you know about the sampler is basically and like the few clips of him, working on the pig farm, and then his interactions with Chris, which is she's not even talking. She's like, fighting for her life. So you don't know his backstory. You don't know, how he became the sampler either. So that's an interesting part of the story that's omitted. But I think it's omitted because, again, what I've noticed with Carruth is that he leaves it to your imagination, because I think he might know the backstory in his mind because he's thought so thoroughly the movie and the plot. But it seems like when he tries to make a movie for the for for the audience, he seems to take out stuff so that he doesn't think is relevant for you, the viewer. And I know that I mentioned this in episode 1 when we talked about Primer. He discussed like the how the what's the character, I don't know his name, but remember like they freak out because that other guy also traveled back in time, the dad of
yes.
and Carruth even says that he's got a lot of questions about it, but because I guess he's kind of obsessive, he knows how he ended up there, but he doesn't want to tell the audience because he doesn't think he finds it more intriguing not to tell the audience. So I think he does it a lot. So I think that's why he also doesn't tell us the background of the backstory. But seeing enough interviews now with the Carruth, I think he in his mind knows the backstory. So so it's probably something that he is aware of, but he doesn't see the need to share it with us.
The other thing I wanted to touch upon, since we're getting towards the end of the podcast, is the one scene that kind of struck me, and I was a little confused by what the exact meaning is, but towards the beginning of the film, when Chris is already succumbed to the effects of the parasite and is being sort of manipulated by the thief, hear the thief basically tell her that you can't really look at my face because it's made out of the same sort of material as the sun. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that sort of sequence.
Oh, I mean, you're right. That happens so earlier in the movie.
Very early. But I was sort of thrown aback, like, what? Like, why was that sort of included or thrown in? Was it to get this sort of, I guess, like, hierarchical structure, like he's so much above her and that she has to do, like, whatever he tells her to do?
Yeah, honestly, that's my interpretation.
Like a dominance kind of structure?
Again, this is what happens when you already this is because I'm interested in what I would say in this, like right now, if I had watched this before Primer, because I had seen Primer. I had thought it was just a quirk that like Carruth is just using because he wants to, like you said, like convey quickly a hierarchy, or he just wants to have it in there as a mechanism to get the scene, kind of going, get the dialogue starting about the water and the writing and the manipulation. Because I don't know if I had watched like this as my first Carruth experience, would I have said something differently here? Because sometimes, like having, like I said, read and listened to a lot of his interviews, it seems like not everything he does has a meaning, and so sometimes I toss scenes like that and think, oh, there's probably no real meaning behind this particular scene. It's just to move the story along.
Or there could be meaning. You don't know with Carruth.
Yeah, I mean, I want to like believe that he's not lying to me when he says like he doesn't like go too crazy with certain like mechanical techniques. But yeah, I mean, I think at a high level for sure it projects the like the hierarchy, because like I usually if if you studied enough ancient religions, that the one of the prominent ones is always the sun god, the god of the sun or the sky. And I think in many ways he's projecting to Chris like, I am now your god and you must do whatever I say. Like also like how he talks, right? Like, you're gonna drink this water and you're gonna drink it and enjoy it and you're gonna want more. Like it speaks almost like godlike. This A, B, and C are going to happen.
Right. It was just a complete sort of power move of like who's in charge.
And then you can tell that he's lying to her because she's hungry and he's like, all the food's poison. And then you see later after he does all the stealing that when he releases her,
he eats all of it.
Yeah, because she's been starving for probably weeks, and it's not poison because she clearly doesn't die in the movie. So it was just a form of manipulation and like I said, power. Yeah,
it was interesting. I mean, most of that sort of sequence is straightforward. Just the idea of him like saying that he's made of the same material as the sun, I was like, oh, that was very interesting sort of imagery. And then they like show the rest of his body, just not his face during that sequence. I thought it was an interesting direction that he was trying to go in to try to capture that dominance that the thief had over Chris.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously there's little cuts to him and his character, especially towards the end with the plants, that we definitely know
Mhm.
he's not made out of the sun. So
No, no, of course not. So here's one other thing I wanted to touch upon, and that's at the very beginning. Is what do you think they were trying to convey with um, the kids sort of drinking the extract of the parasite and becoming in unison with one another?
I think it was, uh, you know, it's interesting with this movie where you try to give your interpretation, but then you start thinking, what is the director trying to do? I think at least when I first saw it, I thought it was just a way to kind of like get the audience leaned into the fact that this is not, even though you see like a normal train, a normal bike, a normal car, this is still a sci-fi movie, or at least a fan, like it's not like a everyday, like I just film with my camera outside, like type
No.
of everyday story. So I think it's a mechanic for that. Honestly, I think I think it's to show that there is something weird in this universe, in this world, but I don't think it's anything honestly like beyond that. Like I don't think it's like there's so bigger message there. With the sun one, I could see it, but this one not really. But I think it's there to get you like leaning into like, oh, this isn't just good. This is a sci-fi fantasy type movie. Then it's obvious you learn that it's sci-fi, but this is not like your typical like slice of life type of movie.
Oh
So.
no, not at all. I was just kind of curious. Yeah, I definitely think that it was sort of portray the fact that there's going to be some weird events that are going to go along with this film. Yeah, it was just interesting that that's sort of how you're introduced with the idea that there's some parasitic interaction. Was that once you consume that tea or whatever it is that those two kids drink, that all of a sudden they're sort of in one with one another in terms of their movements and everything else.
So I actually have a question for you then. There is some powerful lines around, when it's revealed to her that she had the cancer removed from her cervix,
Mm-hmm.
and basically her ability to reproduce is stripped from her. I'm just curious what you think. Not just the movie, but maybe Kruth is trying to say to the audience around that. Like, I don't think that's just dropped in there because like unlike your earlier point, I don't think it's dropped in there like as a mechanic or anything like that. I think there's something. There. Like I think he's. I was actually kind of like, because I kept wondering like what's the purpose of having this scene, this line throughout, and then like even at the end, she's holding the pig and stuff, and like as if is she using that to replace her motherhood? Like, because as we know, like motherhood in general is we can there's a whole cultural discussion here, but it is an important aspect of being a woman in many ways. So obviously that's a very traumatic experience to learn that you're freaking you've had surgery first of all, and now they're telling you, yeah, your ability to reproduce has been negated.
Yeah, well, that was one of the, I think, mechanisms that Carruth used in the plot to sort of, because a lot of it is that the characters for most of the film, they don't really know. They know something's up, but they are not really sure what, right? Because they don't have any recollection of what happened. But at a certain point, Chris and Jeff, once they see the wound on their, near their ankle, that they sort of have this connection because of that, right? They went through some of the same experience, although they don't remember what that experience is. And so I think what was interesting during that sequence when she finds out she can't have kids, she still goes through the fact that she feels this like great idea of loss, right? And she doesn't have kids, but I imagine that's like one of the worst emotions to have as a mother is when you lose your kids. And she feels that because, but she doesn't quite understand why. But it's the fact that her piglets were taken away from her, and so I think that's sort of the idea that she's feeling that without really understanding why she's feeling that. I think that's all that Carruth or why Carruth included that.
Yeah, I was just interested in hearing your thoughts because like I was kind of confused by it. Like I thought it was important, but I couldn't piece it.
I think part of it was just breaking cycles, and you don't know like when she's had surgery or whatever. It could have been due to the parasite. In fact, it probably was in some way.
That's what I thought initially, but that's not clarified. Like it could have been during that, but it could have been. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, she would probably remember it. And I don't think that's like a big takeaway. It's more the fact that she couldn't have kids, and yet she still felt the loss as if she had lost her kids, right? And so, like, I imagine all of that emotional toll was just so much on her. It was to the point where the pigs felt terrified, right? Because they had lost something and they were scared of the farmer. And at the same time, that's paralleled by the sequence of Chris and Jeff gathering all their supplies and then hiding and cuddling in the bathtub out of fear. And I think that was one of the sort of messages is you can sort of think that when something's going on in a cycle, you can sort of think that it's never going to end, right? It's just always going to be the same. But these pigs that represented them had a completely different personality than probably all the other pigs, and they reacted in a different way. And that just ended up the idea, or when the piglets were taken away and thrown over the bridge, that was just the sequence that led to the demise of the demigod-like sampler figure. Because he thought, I could just throw the pigs away and nothing's going to happen like he'd probably done a million times before. It's just, in this case, he miscalculated.
Yeah, he's just probably not aware. So, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so
I don't know.
ratings?
That's all I got from it, that sort of sequence. There might have been more to it. I just didn't quite catch that. I think it just added to the plot in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised because, again, with his films, I'm sometimes left with a lot more questions than answers. So, but I think that's the purpose. So.
Yeah, and I think that's partly why we both like Carruth's style so far. Yeah, within his first two films. So, yeah. All right, you want to give your rating then?
Yeah, 8.5 out of 10.
Okay, I'll give it about. I'd probably give it around 7.5 to 8, somewhere around that. It's really hard to give certain numbers, but I can give you sort of a range as to where I would put it. It was close to Primer for me, but not quite. I don't know. There was just something. I just love the sort of plot dynamics and the universe he created within Primer. That was just my personal taste.
And I'm convinced that I think I gave Primer 7.5. So like it's like I have like the reverse scores that you do. So
yeah.
Which means that that means that the third film we're gonna be in agreement. 10 out of 10.
We'll see. We can only hope so. But
yeah.
Anyway, do you have any last final thoughts on the film?
Yeah, I mean, this is recorded before we have any audience, but I guess if you are listening, my message is actually to the public, saying like, in this era of like where movies are kind of like they kind of taste all like chicken, as they say, they're kind of like all the same. It's actually nice to see movies that were like, like there was actually a lot of thought, passion, and like, just like last week we talked about Clerks, like movies that like, they're not perfect, but like, nowadays it's so mundane, like the stuff you can go to the theaters and watch. Like you're gonna watch the 80th Disney release, like at one point you got to get bored,
Let's go with Mulan 4 Disney or Toy Story like 7 or 8. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
So, but I mean, I know that's what people eat up, and it's easy. Like I said, it's like chicken. It's easy to eat, easy to digest. But I think, I think for a lot of people that gets old after a while. So,
yeah, one thing I think we're going to definitely try to do on this platform is review movies that have definitely sort of gone more under the radar. Not necessarily your typical blockbuster films. I know there are certain channels that do that, but really, you want to sort of highlight or give credit to, more unique or novel films and filmmaking. I think that's something that we both sort of enjoy watching, and that we'll try to sort of bring awareness towards.
Yeah, I know that when I try to pick the movies, like I think we both do this, but I know personally I can speak here where at least the movies that I do try to select movies that I don't think he's either gotten all the critic love, and because critics didn't cover it, or even if they did cover it, they didn't like it, or even movies that like critics did love, like maybe in independent festivals like Sundance, but like the public will never watch because either they're not on streaming platforms or they're just not mass marketed like Marvel movies are, or Marvel is Disney now, but like Disney or Warner Brothers movies are. So
sure. Yeah, we'll definitely within most of our sort of film reviews from now going forward is sort of maintain that sort of style in picking these types of films and TV series. So yeah, with that, if you enjoyed our sort of commentary on Upstream Color, just please subscribe to our channel and give us a like. And yeah, we will be. We're not quite sure what film we'll be releasing and watching next week, but we'll definitely let you know. And please stay tuned. So you take care. Bye.